the end of the session. So look forward to a good session. Rajesh, over to you.
All right. Hello everyone. I'll just check if this thing is working. All right, cool. It is. It's good. How do I go back? Really? All right, cool. Hello everyone. I just want to know, first of all, how many of you, on a show of hands, how many of you have heard of Bitcoin? Okay, not on the brochure here, but before that. All right. And how many of you have actually mined some? Okay, that's interesting. So I would like to start off this. I mean, this is more like an introductory session to the entire Bitcoin ecosystem, right? So I would start off with answering some basic questions of why did this Bitcoin really emerge. One of the primary reasons was that in online payments, there is this third-party payment gateway, right, which is taking a lot of money. Now, the lot of money is that on the percentage terms. The reason why it is on the percentage terms is that there is, in online world, you don't really know your customer. So, for example, there is a sender, there is a receiver, there is a buyer and a seller. The seller does not really know who the buyer is. So you need that intermediary third party who both of them can trust. And the third party has to mitigate his risk of fraudsters. That fraudster risk mitigation is essentially pushed down to the good guys who are actually transacting. So for example, let's say there is a fraudster who is actually who has made a payment of 1,000 rupees and he does not really have the credits to do that. But then the third party is liable to actually give it to this original seller. So in order to mitigate his risk, what he does is, for all the honest buyers, he takes a bit of a processing fee. And that essentially he tries to equate and make some money for himself. So the question really is, why should the honest buyer really pay anything, right? And that comes to our cryptography problems, which is, if there is no trust, whom do we trust, right? If there is no individual that we can trust, we should trust on something where the buyer and the seller can say, okay, yeah, I have the money and it's not a fraud money. So for Bitcoin, we went with cryptography. And we would honestly say that in cryptography we trust. So in the course of this presentation, I will explain how this cryptography actually works on the Bitcoin landscape. And in the end, we will end up with some opportunities which are available for entrepreneurs and Bitcoin enthusiasts. Let's start with the very basics of cryptography. There's something called as public key cryptography, which is there for quite some time. Most of the email clients use it. Now, the way it actually works is very simple. There is a key pair. It's a lock with two keys, basically. Okay? Let's say I am the one who wants to receive something, some document, some level of, let's say I want to receive a Bitcoin from somebody else. What I will do is that I will share my public key. And I will keep one more key to myself. Now, the guy who wants to sell or send me a Bitcoin will take my public key, encrypt the data, encrypt the Bitcoin itself in that public key, and send it across to me. I can decrypt, and only I can decrypt, because I will have the private key, which is a key pair, and nobody else in the world can have my private key. Okay, so this is the fundamental concept that the entire Bitcoin was built on. So what really happens is the ecosystem was built around this. If you look at the ecosystem here, there is a sender, there is a receiver. Both of them have their chains, which is their public key and a private key, and like, they can transact over that. It also brings us to the point where how do you get these bitcoins? How do you start getting people together? So there was this concept of having exchanges where people can buy bitcoins and sell bitcoins for real money. So there are a lot of these exchanges these days, the Mt. Gox and BTC China and all those guys who can take dollars. Today's the current rate for Bitcoin is $210. So essentially you can buy Bitcoins from exchanges which are being used in the transaction flow. It also brings us to a very peculiar thing, which is the validator, which is basically a Bitcoin miner. We will talk about the miners and the reason why they are needed in the system in the next few slides. Going forward, how do you start off? How do you enter the Bitcoin ecosystem? All you need is essentially a client software. It's a software application called as a wallet. Now, the wallet essentially has the most important thing that you can see is your address. If a person wants to get money, he can just say that please send it to this address. The wallet will take care of getting the money and storing it to yourself. If you want to send money, you can do that. If you want to transact, if you want to buy from, let's say, whichever exchange you want, even on the top right corner, if you see there's Mt. Gox and whatever is the valuation, you can buy that from there and keep the wallet. Now, essentially, this wallet is your, let's say, in the most trivial sense, it's a bank account where you store your money, right? And this has to be very secure. You have to keep it yourself. This is the weakest part of the entire ecosystem, because here is where you can actually get attacked and people can steal your money. Now, once you have a wallet, and let's say you have transaction, you have opened up your wallet and you have given your ID to somebody to send a Bitcoin to you. Now, what really happens in a transaction? Now, let us step back a bit and think about what really happens in real-world transactions. On a real-world transaction, I have 10 rupees. I'll give that 10 rupees to somebody else. And the reason why he takes those 10 rupees is that there is a central authority called RBI which guarantees him that the 10 rupees is real. That 10 rupees can be used further. Now, there needs to be something like that, which is like a third party who says, yes, this is a Bitcoin, and this is a legitimate Bitcoin, and somebody has to validate that the transaction really happened, right? So that is where the concept of miners come in. Miners is like, a savvy term. It's actually more like clerks. They are not really they are not really miners, they are just clerks, wherein they just take the transactions and then validate whether this transaction is about a valid Bitcoin, and then add it to the transaction log and say, okay, yeah, I validate that this Bitcoin has been transferred to him. That also enables people to make sure that the Bitcoin does not get double spent. In the sense, on the most trivial, again, if I want to bring back some parlance to the offline world, it should not be like I have 5 rupees and I keep minting 5 rupees and keep giving, right? If I have one 5 rupee coin, I should be able to transact only once. The validators or the transaction guys or the Bitcoin miners basically make sure that the Bitcoin is used only once. So considering that Bitcoin transaction requires, okay, so now we have the ecosystem pretty clear. There is a sender, there is a receiver, there is a middleman who is a miner who takes it, analyzes all the logs and says that, okay, this Bitcoin has actually gone there. Now that essentially opened up a lot of things around 3 years back. Okay, so what really happened is that the fundamentals of the system will say that whenever you do a transaction and whenever you validate a transaction, to incentivize the transaction, so let's say I am the clerk, right? Why would I take your log and see that and make sure that the log is correct and why would I do that work? I don't want to do it otherwise, I mean, unless I'm incentivized. So the incentive was to give bitcoins. Whenever a person adds a transaction, adds a block to the transaction log, he will get bitcoins. So they started giving 50 bitcoins before. And then said, okay, right now you can get 50 bitcoins for every transaction log. And that became like a huge gold rush. In the sense, everyone who had a computer, everyone who had a bunch of university computers in their labs, which was idle, they started pushing it to this system, made a peer-to-peer system which was like extremely scalable, and then started mining. And literally mining and holding cash, right? Because adding a new block was more money making than providing a service. So for example, if I have a service where I accept 1 Bitcoin, versus if I have a miner which will actually give me 50 Bitcoins to just validate the service, was a much more valuable thing. So that started a gold rush. And as I said, the entire gold rush was started by this one particular block. It's called as a Genesis block. If you see the timestamp over there, it's in 2009, January 3rd, that a guy called Satoshi, he started this entire concept of block generation. If you see over there, the generation of this block has a reward point of 50 over here in the bottom part of this. And that is the first transaction that went into the system. Now, the point is, right now, okay, there is a ledger, let's say, on the offline land, right? I mean, bringing to the parlance of that. There's a ledger. The first page of it is written with this. And because of creating of that first page, the guy who created has been rewarded 50 Bitcoins. Now, adding to this ledger, if he was the only guy who was adding to the ledger, then it would have become a centralized system. And then we would get back to the old problem of having a central guy who is the authority to enable transactions. So in order to mitigate that, and in order to change that thing, it was decentralized and was told that anyone can add this ledger, anyone can add a block to this ledger. But how will you make sure that the block which is added is really a new page in this ledger? Was that you take all the pages, you combine them, make a new page out of this, attach it, and then send it out to the rest of the community. And if they say yes, this is a new page, with a vote, they'll say, okay, yeah, this is a new page, right? That brings us to the mining details. Now, the details of this I would want to talk about, especially on the third point over there, is that every block or every new page that is created from the previous set of blocks. What happens is you take a block, you take the set of transactions which have happened, and you figure out a target hash. Now, the target hash, if you've seen the previous slide, was that there were a bunch of zeros with a hash string, right? The target hash is always set by this network of this peer-to-peer system, which will make sure that people who are writing the new block or the new page to this ledger are doing real work. They are not really just randomly writing something without having any, just to make sure that the entire system is foolproof. So you take that, you take the latest block, you take the set of transactions, you add your own bits of nonce, which will help you get the new hash block, which is the target hash of the system, and then you generate, you add it, you're done. You are being rewarded with 25 Bitcoins. So essentially what happened over the past 3 to 4 years was that there was this 50 Bitcoins that was always coming in. Then the people said, okay, look, if you have this 50 Bitcoins, then the resource is like infinite. You can't really quantify it. For anything to get quantified, the resource has to be limited, right? You quantify versus gold because you know that gold is limited. If gold was easily mintable, like if there was infinite resource for that, there was no point in having gold as your standard, right? So everyone came into a consensus that, okay, we should limit it to say there is just 21 million bitcoins in the world. And every 4 years, adding one sheet to this ledger or one block to this blockchain essentially gives you half the previous. So every 4 years it gets half. Today I'm getting 25 bitcoins for adding one sheet. In the next 4 years I'll be getting 12.5. But in order to encourage block generation, there is a certain transaction fee, a fixed fee. Unlike the payment gateway fees where there is a percentage, there is a fixed fee to incentivize people to generate these blocks. So essentially, this is the system, okay? And the network as such is that there is only one true Bitcoin network across the globe. There is it is completely decentralized where everyone can be part of this network. There are low transaction fees because, there is no real reason why it has to be high. And the network maintains that there is like a constant Bitcoin generation at every 10 minutes. They look at the set of logs, generate a new block, and add it. So that, again, the network does. Today, the network of computers that are actually managing this transaction log or this entire blockchain is able to compute around 100 petaflops, as in the power is around 100 petaflops. Now, that is 10 times faster than the fastest supercomputer which is there in the world today, known today. It also brings us to an interesting point where the transactions are irrevocable. In the sense, if I have paid you something, I have paid you for life, right? There is no central authority which will say, no, this was a bad thing, recall it or something. So the network maintains all these, guarantees all these things. Some of the advantages that we have is that there is almost zero processing fee. There is no need of a bank account. So as we saw, there was just one wallet that was needed for you to get transactions, right? And there is equal chance of mining. If you have a decent enough computing power, you can also become a transaction logger, and you can also start mining. You can get coins, and anyone can create an exchange. You can have an exchange where, as new as past month, there is one company in Ahmedabad which has started taking Indian rupees to give you bitcoins. Mt. Gox and BTC China, one of the ex-Yahoos, they started Chinese Bitcoin exchange, and which basically made the entire thing to go to $200 and stuff like that, because the demand increased in China because of this. There is anonymity because the address that you see is not your own name or anything. It is just a cryptographic hash of whatever it is. And businesses have started accepting bitcoins today. There is WordPress, Baidu. Again, China is like leading the entire thing over here. And there is Reddit. All these guys have started accepting bitcoins for their services. And there is financial control. So since there is no central authority who controls this entire system, whoever owns a bitcoin kind of has the bitcoin for life, right? But this graph is very interesting. It is interesting in a negative way, because if you see, it was $20, and within a month, it went to $120 in Jan, March, sometime then. This kind of a unstable or volatile system is actually very tough for an economic, in terms of economy, right? So the Bitcoin enthusiasts and everyone who believe in Bitcoin, they say that this is going to become stable. The reason is that it is just 3 years old or 4 years old. So the financial institution or this entire ecosystem requires to mature itself, and it will stabilize. But there are a lot more concerns The concerns are it is anti-inflationary. I'm not a financial expert or an economist or something, but I'll just say that it is because of a keyword there, anti-inflationary, which is if I have one Bitcoin, it will always increase because the value of one Bitcoin is always appreciating. It never depreciates because there is always demand, and if a lot more people use it, there is a lot more demand, and the supply is limited to 21 million. So it's always anti-inflationary because I don't really lose my, so today my 100 rupees will be 10 rupees in 10 years. But what I have as Bitcoin today will be probably 100 Bitcoins in next 10 years. It is hacker prone. Right now the network makes sure that it can do up to 30 trillion calculations per second with 100 petaflops. But hey, I mean, if one guy can do, probably a couple of supercomputers can come up and do to beat this system. There is regulatory uncertainty. RBI recently has kind of given up on this thing and said, we are going to wait and watch and not really go ahead with any of this. The most important thing becomes securing your digital wallet now, because we used to right now have bank lockers and huge vests in our house to secure our money, but now digitally we should start securing our wallets and make sure things are there. And of course the volatile exchange prices is uncertain. But I would want to, in the closing things of my talk, I would want to come up with a bunch of predictions that are going to happen perhaps. The present day disruptions because of peer-to-peer networks are like telephones are not being used anymore. Your US calls and UK calls are all on Skype or Hangout or something. These are all built on peer-to-peer systems. SMS is almost obsolete. Your WhatsApp and Line and every other messenger app is taking care of that. Your file transfers, music players, Spotify is a peer-to-peer music transfer or a music streaming website. And mail, I mean, the present generation does not even know how to write an inland letter or whatever, right? So it's almost an obsolete. You can actually keep it as an antique and probably sell it for a better price a few years down the line. But in all of these years, there is just one monolithic institution which has survived, and that is bank. And this entire thing is to disrupt that. In order to make sure that banks are good for money lending perhaps, for your loans and stuff like those, but do we really need them for online transactions? Well, can be questioned. So that brings us to the one and only decentralized global financial system where you can transfer money over IP. It has gotten a lot of opportunities. One of the opportunities, like some of the e-commerce websites are thinking about it to make sure that, as the previous speaker was telling, the KYC, the know your customer sort of a thing, where the transaction, when it is done in 10 minutes, when there is a approval that this transaction has happened, it is irrevocable. So the businesses can be confident in doing businesses with this. It is innovative in that money can reach where banks cannot reach. One of the recent things was in Kenya and Western Africa, there were a bunch of NGOs which raised money using Bitcoins. There are cases where, there are cases of similar to Kickstarter where people have approved on a particular thing on Bitcoins. And then it is a worldwide system where there is no forex. There is, it's equal everywhere. In India, if you have a Bitcoin, it is same as what you have in US, UK, or wherever it is. But there are opportunities with respect to making Bitcoin more and more successful. It does not really make sense to have a face-to-face transaction today, because you can't go to a supermarket and say, okay, I'll swipe a credit card, and that way I cannot swipe a Bitcoin and say I'll buy this thing, because there is this 10-minute confirmation that is needed from the rest of the system that the transaction has really happened. So there are efforts in order to come up with some strategies to build that. So yeah, there are a lot more problems in this system, and there are a lot more opportunities as well. So it depends on who you are. If you're an entrepreneur, you'll take it as an opportunity. Otherwise, you'll take it as a problem. So with that, I would like to end this and open up for questions. Thanks.
Hello. Can I have a really here?
Oh,
Can I have a really low power computer like a Raspberry Pi or some ARM based thing?
Yeah.
Doing this all the time, can
Sure.
I get transaction? I mean,
yes,
does it even work out with the amount of current bills I'm paying?
definitely. Yeah. So see, right now there are actually custom-made Raspberry Pis for this. You can buy it off the shelf. There are a couple of companies in UK who are doing it. Raspberry Pi is more of a UK thing, right? So Element 14 is actually promoting it. And the interesting thing is this requires floating point operations. I mean, I'm going a bit into a detail of technical thing. So it requires floating point operations. So it requires you to have GPUs.
No, bottom line, how much will I earn?
See, that depends. That it does not really mean that, so the probability of you earning is equal across, right? So when I say the probability of earning is equal, it's almost like you have a coin, you toss it, you getting a probability of one heads is the same as that of tails. If you do it with 100 coins, it does not really mean that you are going to increase your probability of, at the start of you tossing 100 coins, the probability is the same. You will still have just 50-50, right? So you can have, your nonce that I was talking about, where you take that thing and try to get to the current hash, the target hash, can be something where it's a lottery, right? Where you have actually got it first. And sometimes you might end up doing a lot of computations and not get that as well. And that is why it is called mining, right? It's, if we take a physical parlance, if you go to Kolar goldfields over here and mine, probably you might get it. But if you start mining right in front of your house, then you might not get gold, right? So it's the same problem, but there is no definitive answer that, okay, I just have to put a supercomputer there and I will definitely make a few bitcoins. That is not that. I don't know if I was able to explain it to you, but maybe that's the closest I could get to. No one owns the system.
Someone should have invented it, right, to start with?
So it is a peer-to-peer system. No one owns it. The inventor, the guy who founded it is Satoshi, who wrote the Genesis block.
He is the owner then.
There is no owner. So it's like your peer-to-peer system where you, let's say I'm sure you all use torrents, where you have put in a file, and there is one other guy who has taken it, and there is a few other guys who have seeded the files, right? No one owns that file anymore.
Okay, the 2.1 limitation, which whoever put, means he has a right to change it, or even he doesn't have?
No one has a right to change. The transaction, when it is locked by the network, it is locked by the network. No one changes.
And who has developed it, he would be knowing the system, so he may screw up it later, right? Means when it develops fully,
Yeah.
say he introduces another 2 million Bitcoin
Yeah.
and use it for himself.
No, he
He'll
can't.
become trillionaire if it goes to.
No,
say,
he can't just like that introduce 2 million bitcoins, because he has to be part of the network. So you have a ledger, right? The ledger concept. You need to take the ledger and then add the sheet. You can't have a separate ledger and say I have separate bitcoins, right? You can't just have a parallel ledger in this entire transaction. So that will make sure that you have.
One more question.
Yeah.
means
Oh, I
US,
guess
if
that-
US come,
Yeah, actually we are running out. Okay,
Yeah, hi.
we have run out of time.
Hi, I'm Sudesh from Redbus.
Okay, yeah,
I'm quite new to the Bitcoin, so I'm just read about a few things, and
Yeah.
this is something definitely an interesting session and a lot of learning. So my question is this: Bitcoin as it two questions. One, you explained in the beginning the reason why Bitcoin exists
Yeah.
and why should it be there. And
Yeah.
second, I just need a little bit from a transaction point of view, right?
Yeah.
Because eventually any currency is a parallel currency.
Yeah.
So building any currency, it has to bring in real transaction platforms and actually should be able to make transaction.
Correct.
Given the e-commerce space today, the way the pace or the industry, the ecosystem today, do you think there is actually a need for Bitcoin to exist given all the challenges?
Yes, it is. There is the very need is you are giving your users or your customers less transaction fees. You don't charge it, right? From a pure business standpoint, you don't need to pay any transaction fees, right? So your customers, if you open up with your Bitcoins, you will obviously be more interested to trade with Bitcoins than with real currency where there is a trusted party and you have to give that money. So there is definitely a need.
So,
Sorry? It's hacker prone, as I said, that a hacker has to come up with 100 petaflops. I guess, I'm sorry, we'll take it offline.
I think this is
One last question.
last question, yes. Sanath from Intel. And, great session, by the way.
Thanks.
Is this, so in the history of both mobile payments as well as the internet,
Yeah.
there have been these phenomena where
Yeah.
these fads come up for a bit and they disappear after some time. So Second Life is a great example.
Correct.
Where
Yeah.
many people invested in this virtual world. People bought buildings in this
Yes,
virtual
yes,
world and
yes.
using real world currency, and now that's
Very true.
going down. Right?
Correct.
What's your opinion? What, to me, for something like this to take off, there has to be a mass market adoption. It has
Correct.
to really,
Yeah.
it's numbers that matter. Right?
Understood. Yeah.
And in this, if with a limitation of 21 million bitcoins, right? If anytime the resource is limited, how do you inherently prevent that from
Okay. Yeah.
reaching
So,
the same phenomenon?
good point. So in order to answer that itself, the Bitcoin as such has a divisibility of a few to the 8 digits, basically, and each of those 0.000 whatever that one Bitcoin is called a Satoshi. Okay, it was named after the inventor or the founder of it. So essentially, 21 million Bitcoins is to make sure that there is a resource constraint such that the economy can work in a good way, and the divisibility makes sure that it is scalable to almost all the transactions that happen in the world today. So, and in the near future. So that's why there is a divisibility. Since it's a mathematical and a cryptographic currency, you can go on making sure that the currency is divisible. So, and with respect to adoption, the fundamentals of the system is fairly strong. It gives you trusted authority, which validates a transaction. It doesn't take much of a transaction fee, and it is global, which is the same as that of internet today. So because of the fundamentals being very strong, I think there will be adoption to such a system.